Lady Beatrice Vale knew the letter was hers before Lady Maribel Montclair read the first word, because shame sometimes recognized its own handwriting before the mind could deny it. The folded sheet rested between Lady Maribel's white-gloved fingers in the glittering drawing-room of Montclair House, held high enough for curiosity and low enough to pretend delicacy. Around them, London's finest company had gathered for an evening musicale, all candlelight, silk, polished shoes, and the soft hunger of people who had come for music and found something far more entertaining. Beatrice stood near the edge of the room, beside a marble-topped table no one used, positioned where her mother had placed her, and where society had always preferred her. Visible enough to prove, attendance distant enough to be overlooked, until now. Lady Beatrice, Lady Maribel said, with a smile so gentle it could have passed for kindness if one did not hear the blade beneath it. You must help me solve a very awkward puzzle. The last notes from the quartet had barely faded. A violinist lowered his bow. Two matrons turned their heads. Lord Edwin Harcourt, lounging near the mantel with an expression of practiced amusement, looked at Beatrice as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. Beatrice's fingers tightened around her closed fan. "I am not aware of any puzzle, Lady Maribel. That is what makes it so delicate." Maribel glanced toward the long windows, where her brother, Adrian Montclair, Duke of Calderwick, stood speaking to Lord Bexley. "This letter arrived among my brother's correspondence. Naturally, I would never expose a private matter unless confusion made silence unkind." The word unkind moved through the room like perfume. Everyone understood what it meant. Something cruel was about to happen, and everyone would pretend it had been done from concern. Beatrice looked at the wax seal. Red. Her breath caught. She had not sealed her letter in red. She had used blue wax from her own writing desk, plain and unfashionable, the same blue she always used, because no one in Vale House ever wanted it. "If the letter concerns me," Beatrice said, forcing each word to remain level, "I should prefer to see it first." Lady Maribel's eyes brightened. "Of course. But perhaps the opening will refresh your memory." Beatrice felt Lady Fenwick's stare from across the room. Her mother's gaze did not ask whether Beatrice was innocent. It commanded her not to make the family look worse. Maribel unfolded the page. The sound was soft. It seemed to silence half of Mayfair. "Your Grace," she read, "I write with reluctance, but necessity has made silence impossible." Beatrice went still. Those words were hers. She had written them 3 mornings ago, alone at her rosewood desk, after Lord Edwin Harcourt had again implied that the Duke approved his attentions. She had written because a woman could refuse a man plainly, and still be told she had encouraged him by being civil. She had written because a private warning seemed safer than a public scene. Now the private warning was held before a room that adored scenes. Maribel continued, "There are matters a lady cannot speak aloud without inviting judgment. Yet I trust your honor more than I trust the silence of those around me." A whisper stirred behind a fan. Beatrice tasted cold metal in her mouth. She saw the trap with terrible clarity. The opening was truly hers. Denying the letter entirely would make her a liar. Admitting it would make the rest believable. Lady Maribel lowered her lashes and read the next line with exquisite softness. "I had thought that if you knew the truth of my heart, you might understand why I have watched you with admiration beyond propriety." A small sound passed through the room, not quite laughter, not quite shock. Beatrice felt it land on her skin. That sentence was not hers. It was too theatrical, too fevered, too conveniently humiliating. It turned a cautious warning into a confession. It turned fear into pursuit. It turned her into the kind of woman society most enjoyed punishing, one who had reached above herself and been caught. "I did not write that," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried because the room wanted it to break. Lady Maribel looked wounded. "My dear Lady Beatrice, it is in your hand. The first lines are..." "That sentence is not." Lord Edwin gave a soft laugh near the mantel. An unfortunate distinction, perhaps. Beatrice did not look at him. If she looked, she might remember the conservatory at Lady Bexley's, his body angled just enough to block her easy retreat. His voice low as he told her women in her position should be grateful when a gentleman offered attention. She kept her eyes on the letter instead. The stolen thing, the opened thing, the thing now wearing her hand like a mask. Across the room, the Duke of Calderwick turned fully. He did not hurry. He did not need to. His stillness changed the arrangement of every person around him. Tall, dark-haired, and severe in black evening dress, Adrian Montclair carried his rank with a discipline that made display unnecessary. He looked first at Beatrice, then at Maribel, then at the letter. Not the scandal, not the flushed faces, the letter Maribel, he said. One word. The room cooled. Lady Maribel smiled at him with sisterly patience. "Adrian, don't look so grave. I'm only trying to clarify a matter before it becomes uglier. You are reading a lady's private correspondence. Aloud, only because it bears your name. Then you should have brought it to me." A pause followed. Not long, long enough. Beatrice saw Lady Maribel's fingers tighten slightly against the page. Adrian crossed the room. Society parted for him with the instinctive obedience rank always purchased, though his expression suggested he would have preferred obedience to come with conscience. He stopped beside his sister and held out his hand. "Give it to me," Maribel laughed lightly. "It is only a letter. Then surrendering it should not distress you." The silence sharpened. Maribel placed the paper in his hand with a graceful little sigh. "You make everything sound like Parliament." Adrian did not answer. He turned the folded edge toward the nearest candle. Beatrice watched him examine the seal, and for the first time since Maribel had spoken her name, she felt something other than humiliation. Not hope. Hope was too expensive. Attention, perhaps. The red wax bore the Montclair crest, but the edge was uneven, raised where it should have been smooth. A thin mark showed where something narrow had slid beneath it. Adrian held it closer to the light. "This was opened," he said. Maribel's smile thinned. "Most letters are opened eventually, not before they are received." The words entered the room and made every whisper retreat. Beatrice heard her own pulse. Adrian did not touch the broken ridge. He studied it like a witness that had not yet learned to lie. "Lady Beatrice," he said, turning to her, "did this letter leave your hand sealed in red wax?" She drew one careful breath. "No, Your Grace. I sealed my letter in blue." The first true ripple of uncertainty passed through the room. Lady Octavia Quenby, who had stood near Maribel all evening like society's approved answer to a question no one had asked aloud, lowered her gaze. Lady Fenwick went pale with alarm rather than relief. Lord Edwin shifted by the mantel. Adrian saw all of it. Beatrice knew he did because nothing in his face moved. "And did you write the sentence Lady Maribel read last?" he asked. "No." Her voice almost failed, then steadied. "I wrote to warn you that Lord Harcourt had been using your name. I did not write of admiration beyond propriety." This time, several heads turned toward Edwin. He spread his hands with injured ease. "Surely, this is not the place to discuss a lady's nerves." Adrian looked at him. "No. It is the place where someone attempted to make them entertainment." No one laughed then. Maribel stepped nearer to her brother, still smiling, though the smile had become labor. "Adrian, you cannot mean to take her word over mine." He folded the letter once, carefully, and kept it in his possession. "I mean to take evidence over performance." The sentence struck harder because he did not raise his voice. Lady Maribel's cheeks coloured. Beatrice lowered her eyes for 1 second, not from shame, but because the sudden ache behind them was too private for that room. She had not been declared innocent. She had not been restored. Mayfair would leave this house with her name between its teeth. Yet the lie had met resistance in the very moment it expected applause. Adrian turned toward the room. This musicale will continue without further readings. Then, after the briefest pause, he added, "A private letter is not a performance." The rebuke landed on every person who had leaned closer. Fans shifted. Gloves tightened. One woman looked down as though she had discovered something unclean on her own hands. The quartet did not resume. No one wished to be the first to pretend nothing had happened. Beatrice stood beneath the chandelier light with her dignity, still bruised but not entirely taken. Across the few feet between them, the Duke held the altered letter, the red wax broken and glinting like a small, dangerous wound. He had noticed what the room had chosen not to see. In a world where a woman could be condemned by a sentence she had never written, that jagged line in the seal had become the first witness willing to speak for her. The musicale did not continue. It merely pretended to. After several brittle moments, the quartet resumed with the desperate obedience of men paid to make silence less honest. But the melody floated over a room that had lost its appetite for beauty. Beatrice remained near the marble-topped table, with every nerve alert, aware that people had stopped staring only because they had learned to watch from the corners of their eyes. The Duke of Calderwick still held the altered letter. He had folded it once, not carelessly, not possessively, but as if the paper had become evidence and evidence deserved manners. Lady Maribel stood beside him, lovely and wounded in appearance. Yet there was something in the set of her shoulders that did not look wounded at all. It looked thwarted. Lady Fenwick crossed the room with a speed that preserved dignity by refusing to appear hurried. "Your Grace," she said, giving a shallow curtsy, "I fear my daughter is distressed. I shall take her home at once, and we will address this unfortunate confusion privately." Privately. Beatrice knew that word. It had a room in her mother's house, a locked one. Privately meant a written apology before breakfast, a confession disguised as regret, and a command to endure because endurance was easier for everyone else than truth. She raised her head before the old obedience could settle over her mouth. "I am not too distressed to answer questions, Mama." Lady Fenwick turned slowly. Her face stayed smooth. Her eyes did not. Beatrice. The warning in her name would once have been enough. It had governed dinners, calls, introductions, refusals, and even the way Beatrice held her fan. Tonight, after hearing words she had not written read before half of Mayfair, the warning felt smaller, not harmless. Smaller. Adrian watched the exchange with that severe stillness of his. "Lady Beatrice should not be questioned before an audience," he said. "Nor should she be removed before she has had the chance to speak." Maribel gave a little laugh. "Adrian, you're making everyone uncomfortable. That was accomplished before I spoke." The nearest women lowered their eyes. Lord Edwin Harcourt moved toward the music stand as if distance could make him innocent. Adrian noticed, but did not call to him. Not yet. "Mrs. Pike is present," he said. Beatrice followed his gaze. To the far side of the room, where Aunt Rosamond Pike had risen from a chair with the expression of a woman who had been waiting years for people to become foolish enough to require her. She wore grey silk, plain lace, and no visible patience. "I am present," Mrs. Pike said, "and still capable of preventing impropriety, if not stupidity." Someone choked softly on a cough. Adrian inclined his head. "Then, with Lady Beatrice's consent, we shall speak in the small withdrawing room. The door will remain open. Mrs. Pike will chaperone." Lady Fenwick may attend as well if she wishes. Lady Fenwick's lips tightened at being offered what she had intended to control. Beatrice looked at the letter in Adrian's hand. A private thing had been dragged into public light. Now a public room was being asked to release her into guarded privacy. The distinction mattered. "I consent," she said. Maribel stepped closer. "This is unnecessary. Lady Beatrice has already said she wrote part of it. We all understand embarrassment." Beatrice looked at her. "No, Lady Maribel. You understand performance." The words were not loud. That made them worse. Maribel's smile flickered. Adrian's gaze moved briefly to Beatrice, and for one dangerous instant, she felt seen not as an injured lady, but as someone with a blade of her own. Then he turned and led the way toward the smaller room, careful not to offer Beatrice his arm and make her the subject of a new whisper. Aunt Rosamond followed beside her. Lady Fenwick came behind them, stiff, with fury wrapped in silk. The withdrawing room was narrow, warm, and less glittering than the place they had left. A fire burned low behind a brass fender. The door remained open by several inches, a polite line between propriety and curiosity. Adrian placed the letter on a small table without unfolding it. "Lady Beatrice," he said, "I will ask plainly. Did you write to me?" "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Fenwick made a faint sound of alarm. Beatrice did not look at her. "I wrote because Lord Edwin Harcourt had been implying that he enjoyed your approval in pursuing an understanding with me." Adrian's expression remained controlled, but something in the room sharpened. "He does not." The answer came so immediately that Beatrice felt it like a hand against a closing door. "I did not believe he did," she said. "But I feared that if I challenged him openly, he would say I had misunderstood him, or worse, that I had encouraged him." Aunt Rosamond's mouth tightened. Lady Fenwick interjected. "Beatrice, there is no need to describe every awkward conversation." "There is every need," Adrian said. "If my name was used, I require the truth." Lady Fenwick blushed. Beatrice forced herself onward. "Lord Harcourt spoke in a manner that gave me little room to refuse without appearing dramatic. He said my family could not afford to be particular. He said a gentleman with your approval was not a man a woman in my position should reject." "Your position," Adrian repeated. "An earl's daughter with a small dowry and a mother who counts invitations as if they are coin." The admission burned, but it was cleaner than silence. Lady Fenwick looked as though Beatrice had opened the windows in winter. Adrian did not pity her. That was a mercy. Pity would have made her humiliation complete. He unfolded the letter and read only with his eyes. He did not speak the forged line aloud. Beatrice noticed. She wished she had not, because gratitude was a dangerous beginning. "The first half is formal," he said. "Restrained. It asks whether Harcourt has the right to use my name. That is what I wrote. The final lines alter the purpose entirely. Yes, the hand resembles yours, but the pressure changes." He angled the page toward her, not forcing her to come nearer. "Here, and here." Beatrice saw the difference once it was shown to her. The letters leaned like hers, but the confidence was wrong. Someone had studied her hand and misunderstood the person inside it. "It is strange," she said softly, "to see oneself imitated badly." Aunt Rosamond's voice was dry, but not unkind, badly enough to be useful, well enough to be cruel. Adrian turned the outer fold toward the lamplight. "The direction has been scraped." Lady Fenwick frowned. "Scraped?" Faintly. A blade or sharp edge lifted the first address and altered it. The seal was then pressed again. He looked at Beatrice. "You sealed your letter in blue." "Yes." "Do you keep red wax?" "No." Maribel's voice came from the doorway before anyone else spoke. "Half of London keeps red wax, Adrian." She stood with one hand resting lightly on the doorframe, as if she had merely drifted there from concern. The open door allowed it. though her timing condemned her more neatly than any accusation could have done. "How fortunate you are here to instruct us," Aunt Rosamond said. Maribel ignored her. "If there has been some alteration, it may have happened before the letter reached this house." Adrian did not answer at once. He lifted the broken seal toward the lamp. "This is not common red wax. It bears the Montclair crest, because it was in your correspondence. It was in my correspondence, because someone placed it there." Maribel smiled too gently. "You are determined to make a mystery out of a young lady's embarrassment." "No," Beatrice said before Adrian could reply. Her voice surprised even her. "Lady Maribel, you made my embarrassment your entertainment. His Grace is making a mystery out of the part that was not mine." Maribel's eyes flashed. It vanished almost at once beneath wounded sweetness. "My dear, I'm trying to be kind." "Then you should practice in private before attempting it in company." Aunt Rosamond looked down at her gloves, which was the nearest she came to applause. Adrian folded the letter again. "This remains with me." Maribel stepped forward. "Adrian, I'm your sister?" "Yes." His tone cooled. "That is why I am asking no more questions of you tonight." The words landed softly and did damage. For the first time, Maribel had no immediate answer. She turned away with dignity sharpened into threat, leaving a trace of violet perfume behind her. Lady Fenwick gathered herself for one last attempt. "Your Grace, I am certain Lady Beatrice regrets involving your household." Beatrice felt the net lower again, but Adrian did not allow it to close. "Lady Beatrice wrote to prevent my name being used falsely. The person who involved my household is the person who opened her letter." Lady Fenwick went silent. Beyond the open door, the music faltered into its final measure. The evening had changed shape beyond repair. Beatrice understood that nothing had been solved. Mayfair would not wake speaking of scraped ink and lifted wax. It would speak of her. It would savor the forged sentence, because scandal did not need truth when it had rhythm. Yet, as Adrian placed the letter inside his coat, he looked at her with a gravity that steadied the floor beneath her feet. "Lady Beatrice, I cannot undo what was done in that room. No, Your Grace. But I can tell you this. I do not believe the letter, as read, represents what you sent. The words were not warm. They were not romantic. They were better than either. They were the first honest shelter she had been offered all evening." "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet." His gaze moved toward the door where Maribel had disappeared. "Thank me when I discover who expected me not to notice." Beatrice looked through the opening into the glittering room beyond, where every conversation had become cautious and every smile had learned fear. The broken seal had not restored her name. It had only interrupted the theft of it. But interruption was not nothing. For a woman who had been trained to endure quietly while others interpreted her life aloud, it felt almost like the beginning of a voice. By breakfast, Beatrice's name had travelled farther through London than any carriage could have carried her. It had crossed drawing rooms before footmen finished laying fires, slipped beneath doors. With folded gossip sheets, and settled at polished tables where ladies stirred chocolate and spoke of pity with bright eyes. At Vale House, no one needed to announce that the story had arrived. Beatrice saw it in the untouched eggs before her mother's plate, in the rigid angle of Lady Fenwick's shoulders, and in the way her father hid behind a newspaper he had not turned for several minutes. The breakfast room was not large, but that morning it seemed to contain all of Mayfair. Every chair held a judgment. Every spoon against porcelain sounded like a whisper being restrained. Lady Fenwick unfolded a note with fingers that did not tremble because she had trained even anger to observe etiquette. Lady Hartmere sends regrets. She is no longer certain of the hour of her call. She placed it down and took up another. Mrs. Anstruther writes with concern. Concern, of course, is what envy wears when it has visitors. Lord Fenwick cleared his throat. Perhaps the matter will pass if we do not encourage it. Beatrice looked at him over the rim of her teacup. He appeared tired, handsome still in the faded way of men who had inherited a title and postponed courage. His debts had become the silent guest at every family meal. His affection, where it existed, had never learned to stand upright beneath pressure. Lady Fenwick's laugh was brief and without amusement. Pass? A daughter of this house was heard allowing a duke's sister to read a private letter before half of London. I did not allow it, Beatrice said. Her mother turned. Then you should have prevented it. There it was, the impossible standard by which women were judged. Prevent cruelty before it happened. Endure it gracefully if it did. Repair the damage without making anyone uncomfortable. Beatrice set her tea down carefully. I did not know Lady Maribel had the letter until it was in her hand. You knew you had written one. 2. Warn His Grace about Lord Harcourt. Do not repeat that name at this table. Lord Harcourt was the reason for the letter. Your imprudence was the reason for the letter. The words struck. Not because they were new, but because Beatrice knew how long they had been waiting inside her mother. Lady Fenwick had always preferred a manageable daughter to a truthful one. Beatrice had spent years becoming quiet enough to be convenient, and still convenience had not protected her. The letter was altered, Beatrice said. His Grace saw the seal. A broken seal will not stop talk. Lady Fenwick pushed a clean sheet of paper toward her. You will write to Lady Maribel this morning. Beatrice did not touch it. What shall I say? That you regret the confusion. That is not true. Truth is not always useful. Lord Fenwick lowered the newspaper by an inch. Honoria. It was protest without consequence. Lady Fenwick ignored him. You will say emotion overcame you. You will say the letter was private and foolish. You will say you did not intend to embarrass the House of Montclair. I was the one embarrassed. You were the one whose hand appeared on the page. Beatrice looked at the blank sheet. It seemed less like paper than a small white surrender. If she wrote what her mother demanded, society would call it grace. Maribel would call it victory. The lie would become smoother, easier to repeat, and impossible to remove. No, Beatrice said. The word was quiet, but it did not ask permission to exist. Lady Fenwick's face stilled. No, Mama. I will not apologize for a sentence I did not write. Don't be childish, I am being precise. Precision will not save you from ruin. Neither has silence. The room went motionless. Even Lord Fenwick looked up fully then, as if his quiet daughter had spoken from the other side of a locked door. Lady Fenwick's fan opened with a sharp snap, though the morning was cool. You have always had this unfortunate tendency to mistake stubbornness for principle, and you have always mistaken obedience for safety. Her mother's eyes flashed. You will not speak to me in that tone. Beatrice folded her hands beneath the table so no one would see how tightly she held them. Then hear the words and not the tone. A footman appeared at the door, merciful and doomed. Mrs. Pike, my lady. Aunt Rosamond entered without waiting to be adored. Her grey pelisse carried the chill of the street, and her eyes moved over the table with the speed of a general counting the wounded. Ah, she said. Breakfast and execution. I see I have arrived before the burial. Lady Fenwick rose halfway. Rosamond, this is not your affair. My dear Honoria, if you wished your affairs to remain private, you should have raised fewer relatives. She crossed to Beatrice and placed one gloved hand on the back of her chair. It was not dramatic, it was a claim. Have you eaten? No. Good. Scandal digests badly. Lady Fenwick gathered the blank sheet and thrust it toward her sister. She refuses to write an apology. Aunt Rosamond glanced at the paper. How sensible of her. Sensibility would preserve what remains of her reputation. No fear would, briefly. Then it would present the bill. Beatrice looked up at her aunt with a gratitude that hurt because it was so unfamiliar. Aunt Rosamond's expression softened for 1 second, then sharpened again. Beatrice, where is your copybook? The question changed the air. Lady Fenwick frowned. What possible relevance has a copybook? An excellent question, usually asked by people who hope the answer is none. Beatrice rose. It is in my writing desk. Was it there yesterday? Yes. Then let us confirm that it still contains all its pages. Lady Fenwick objected, but too late. Beatrice was already moving. The small morning room upstairs faced the street, and her rosewood writing desk stood beneath the window where the light was best. She had always kept it neat. Neatness had been one of the few freedoms allowed to a daughter with little money and fewer choices. Blue wax in the left compartment, sand shaker beside the pen tray, wafers wrapped in paper. Copybook beneath the blotter. She opened the lid with the key from her chatelaine. At first, nothing appeared wrong. Then she saw the blotter had been turned the wrong way. A small alteration. A careless one. Her pulse slowed rather than quickened, as if the body sometimes recognized danger by becoming very still. She lifted the blotter. The copybook lay beneath it, but the back section gaped slightly. One page had been torn away with such care that only 2 pale threads remained along the binding. Aunt Rosamond came to stand beside her. What was on that page? Beatrice touched the torn edge. Practice phrases. Formal openings. My hand repeated several times. Enough for someone to imitate. The answer formed before she could bear it. Yes. Lady Fenwick had followed them to the doorway. Her face changed quickly, then corrected itself, but Beatrice saw the first expression. Not shock, fear. That hurt more than surprise would have done. Many people misplace pages, Lady Fenwick said. Pages do not misplace themselves after forged lines appear in one's hand, Aunt Rosamond replied. Beatrice stared at the copybook. A letter could be opened, wax could be broken. But this was worse in a quieter way. Someone had not only stolen her words, someone had studied the shape of them. Her hand had been used like a costume. I thought the letter was the wound, she whispered. No, Aunt Rosamond said. The letter was the stage. This is the rehearsal. A knock sounded below, followed by the murmur of the footman. Moments later, he appeared at the morning room door, carrying a salver. On it lay a single card, heavy and white against silver. Lady Fenwick saw the black lettering and went rigid. Aunt Rosamond took it before anyone could forbid her. His Grace the Duke of Calderwick. No one moved. The card seemed cleaner than everything around it, not because it promised rescue, but because it had arrived openly. Unbroken, unread by the wrong hands. Lady Fenwick found her voice first. You will refuse the call. Beatrice looked at the torn page, then at the card. Last night, a forged sentence had tried to make her private warning into public shame. This morning, her mother wished to make silence into survival. But the stolen page lay beneath her hand, and for the first time she understood that silence would not hide her. It would finish the work others had begun. She took the card from Aunt Rosamond. No, Mamma, she said. I will receive him. The footman had scarcely withdrawn before Vale House became a battlefield arranged for company. Lady Fenwick descended ahead of everyone, issuing instructions in a voice too low to be overheard and too sharp to be misunderstood. The best tea service was to be brought out. The curtains in the front drawing room were to be opened only halfway, because full light was unkind to agitation. Beatrice was to sit near the sofa, not at the center of the room, not where she might look like she expected importance. Aunt Rosamond ignored every arrangement, and took the chair with the best command of the door. Beatrice remained standing until her mother noticed and frowned. "Sit down, Beatrice. Do not look as if you are awaiting judgment." "Am I not?" Lady Fenwick's mouth tightened. "You are receiving a morning call from a duke. Remember that before you speak as if this is a parish inquiry. Then perhaps His Grace should be treated as a guest rather than a remedy." Aunt Rosamond's fan opened with a soft snap. "I do enjoy a house where everyone speaks plainly, even by accident." Lady Fenwick did not answer. She moved toward Beatrice and adjusted a fold of her sleeve, though nothing was wrong with it. The gesture was familiar. To the world, it looked maternal. To Beatrice, it felt like being returned to a shelf. "You will allow me to guide the conversation." Beatrice looked toward the closed door. The torn page in her copybook seemed to burn in her mind more fiercely than the letter itself. Someone had entered her desk, touched her private practice, and lifted the shape of her hand. That knowledge had changed the weight of the morning. "No, Mama." Lady Fenwick's fingers stopped. "No?" His Grace called on me. "I will answer him." Before her mother could reply, the footman announced, "His Grace, the Duke of Calderwick." Adrian Montclair entered without haste, yet the room altered at once. Vale House was not poor, but it had the strained dignity of a family keeping appearances polished over thinning silver. Adrian's presence made every careful pretense visible. He bowed to Lady Fenwick, to Aunt Rosamond, then to Beatrice, and the last bow held no extra warmth, which made it safer. He had understood already that excess courtesy could become another rumor. "Lady Fenwick," he said, "Mrs. Pike, Lady Beatrice." Lady Fenwick smiled with the discipline of a woman, standing near a cracked mirror and pretending it was whole. "Your Grace, you honor us. I trust you have come so we may settle last night's unfortunate misunderstanding with discretion." "I favor discretion," Adrian replied. "I do not favor burial." Aunt Rosamond's eyes brightened. Lady Fenwick's smile remained fixed. Naturally, no one wishes to bury anything. But young ladies under pressure sometimes write unwisely, and sisters may misinterpret. It would be regrettable if a private awkwardness became a larger scandal. Adrian looked at Beatrice. "Did you misinterpret your own sentence, Lady Beatrice?" The question was so direct that silence followed it. Beatrice felt her mother's warning before she saw it, but she kept her gaze on the Duke. "No, Your Grace. I did not write the sentence," Lady Maribel read. "And your original purpose? To ask whether Lord Harcourt had authority to use your name in pressing his attentions." "He had none." Lady Fenwick inhaled sharply. "Your Grace, I am certain Lord Harcourt meant only politeness. My daughter's imagination may have given weight to casual remarks." Adrian turned his attention to her. The shift was calm, but Lady Fenwick drew back a fraction. "Lady Fenwick, I have known many casual remarks. They seldom require a forged confession to defend them." Beatrice lowered her eyes briefly, not to hide, but because the relief was too sudden. He had not said he believed her from sentiment. He had treated her account as serious because the facts required it. Adrian returned his gaze to her. "May I ask to see the writing desk from which the letter was composed?" Lady Fenwick stepped forward. "Surely that is unnecessary." "It may be. I prefer to know that before deciding it." Beatrice rose. "You may see it." He paused. "With your permission." The words were quiet, but they entered her more deeply than they should have. Men had asked her mother's permission for her seat, her dances, her calls, even her silences. Adrian had asked hers for a desk. "You have it," she said. Aunt Rosamond stood. "I will attend. No one shall accuse furniture of impropriety in my presence." The party moved upstairs to the small morning room. Lady Fenwick followed because she could not prevent them, and would not be absent from any room where control might still be recovered. Beatrice opened the rosewood desk again. Morning light lay across the surface, revealing every neat compartment with cruel clarity. She placed her seal box on the writing slope. "This is the wax I use." Adrian did not reach for it. "May I?" "Yes." He opened the box and took out one stick of blue wax, holding it near the window. It was plain, darkened at the edges from use. He set it down beside a small folded paper he had brought from his coat. When he opened the paper, Beatrice saw a flake of red wax from the broken seal. The difference was undeniable. Her blue was modest, almost grey in shadow. The red was rich and deep, too distinctive to be mistaken in good faith. Lady Fenwick spoke too quickly. Young ladies borrow things. She may have used red without recalling. Beatrice looked at her mother. "I did not." "Beatrice, after distress, memory can be uncertain. My memory is not distressed enough to invent red wax." Adrian's mouth did not soften, but his eyes moved to her for one brief instant. Approval would have embarrassed her. Respect steadied her. He turned the red flake toward Lady Fenwick. "This wax bears the Montclair impression. Lady Beatrice could not have produced that from this desk." Lady Fenwick's face changed again, that same flicker Beatrice had seen upstairs before. Fear first, argument second. Then perhaps the letter was resealed after arrival at your house. That is precisely what concerns me. Adrian looked toward the copybook. "Mrs. Pike's note mentioned a missing page." Aunt Rosamond lifted the book and opened it to the torn edge. A page of repeated formal phrases. Convenient for anyone who wished to borrow Lady Beatrice's hand without borrowing her conscience. Adrian studied the torn binding. He did not touch it until Beatrice nodded. Then he examined only the edge. "When did you last see this page intact?" he asked. "The day before I wrote the letter. I practiced several openings because I did not want to sound dramatic. You were trying not to be accused of the very tone later forged into your hand." The words struck quietly. Beatrice had known the fact, but hearing it spoken made it sharper. "Yes," Lady Fenwick folded her arms. "This speculation is dangerous. Servants may have entered. A misplaced sheet may have been taken for kindling." Aunt Rosamond gave her a cold look. "I have never known a footman to kindle a fire with penmanship practice while leaving the family accounts untouched." Adrian closed the copybook. "Who had access to this room?" Lady Fenwick answered before Beatrice could. "Family maids. Any caller left waiting, perhaps. It is impossible to know." "Not impossible," Adrian said. "Merely inconvenient." Beatrice turned toward her mother. "Did anyone come upstairs while I was out yesterday? How should I remember every movement in this house? Again, too quick." Beatrice felt the room tilt, not because she believed her mother had forged the letter, but because she knew Lady Fenwick had seen more than she wished to say. Perhaps a maid carrying notes. Perhaps Lady Maribel's servant under some excuse. Perhaps Lord Harcourt admitted too near the hall. In a house governed by appearance, truth could pass through the front door if it wore decent gloves. Adrian placed the blue wax back in its compartment. "Lady Beatrice, I ask your permission to take a small shaving of this blue wax for comparison, and to retain my notes on the missing page. I will not remove your copybook unless you wish it." "Take the shaving," she said. "The copybook stays with me, as it should." Lady Fenwick looked between them, anger thinning into alarm. "Your Grace, surely you do not intend to pursue this publicly?" Adrian's expression remained measured. "That depends on whether the person who made it public leaves any private path to truth. Your sister will be wounded by such suspicion." Lady Beatrice was wounded by certainty before anyone bothered with suspicion. The room grew still. Beatrice felt those words settle somewhere beneath her ribs. He had not said them tenderly. He had said them accurately, and accuracy, after a night of distortion, felt almost like care. Adrian wrapped the blue wax shaving in a clean paper and placed it inside his coat. Then he turned to Beatrice, not to her mother. I will compare this with the seal and with materials from my own house. Until then, destroy nothing. Not the copybook, not any note, not your recollection. His gaze held hers for one restrained second longer. Especially not your courage. The sentence was quiet enough that Lady Fenwick could pretend not to hear it. Beatrice did not have that mercy. It moved through her with a warmth she did not trust and could not deny. I will not, she said. Adrian bowed and withdrew with the same controlled courtesy with which he had arrived. The moment the front door closed below, Lady Fenwick rounded on Beatrice. You have made an ally of a duke, and think that makes you safe. Beatrice looked at the torn copybook, then at the place where the blue wax had lain. No, Mama. For the first time that morning, she heard no tremor in her own voice. I think it makes someone else afraid. The phrase waited for Adrian in reverse, pressed into a blotting sheet as faintly as guilt, trying to become invisible. He found it at the correspondence table in the smaller drawing room of Montclair House, the same table Lady Maribel had used often enough to call it convenient and rarely enough to pretend she did not favor it. Morning had passed into a grey afternoon, and the house had resumed its elegant obedience. Footmen moved softly. Doors closed without sound. Flowers stood fresh in vases, as if fragrance could deny that a lady's name had been torn open there less than a day before. Adrian stood alone beside the table, holding the blotting paper at an angle toward the window. At first, there had been only fragments, curves of letters, a pressure mark. Then, as the light shifted, the words came together backward, always yours beyond propriety. He did not move for several seconds. The line Lady Maribel had read aloud. The line Lady Beatrice had denied writing. It had not merely appeared in the altered letter. It had been practiced here, in his house, on his paper, within reach of people who knew how his servants moved, and when his sister wrote her notes. He set the sheet down with care, because the desire to crush it was useless, and useless gestures were a luxury other men could afford. Always yours beyond propriety. Adrian had heard that arrangement of ugliness before, not as confession, as mockery. 3 weeks earlier at White's, Lord Edwin Harcourt had spoken from behind a glass of wine, while 2 younger men laughed too readily. Quiet women are never as proper as they pretend, Harcourt had said. Give them a little encouragement, and they're always yours beyond propriety. Adrian had disliked the remark then. He disliked many remarks. Dislike in a room full of men who called cruelty wit often remained a look, a silence, a refusal to laugh. Now that silence returned to him with teeth. A footman, Simmons, stood near the door, pale from having been asked questions by a duke who rarely needed to ask twice. Adrian kept his voice even. Who used this table yesterday? Lady Maribel, Your Grace. In the morning. She wrote several notes before luncheon. Who else? Lady Octavia sat with her for a short while. Lord Harcourt called later. He was not in this room long. Was he near the table? Yes, Your Grace. He took up a pen, I believe. Said his own had failed him. And my sister allowed it? Simmons hesitated. Loyalty struggled with fear and lost to accuracy. She laughed, Your Grace. She said, Lord Harcourt was always stealing what wasn't his. Adrian looked at the blotting sheet again. How unfortunate that she was amusing herself. The footman lowered his gaze. Yes, Your Grace. Adrian dismissed him and remained alone for only a moment before the door opened without a knock. Maribel entered in pale blue muslin, her beauty arranged for innocence, and her eyes alert enough to betray that innocence had required effort. You are questioning the servants now. I am questioning the house. How dramatic. She crossed to the mantel, not to the correspondence table. Adrian noticed. One of the pleasures of rank, she continued, is that one may turn embarrassment into official concern. This is not embarrassment. He lifted the blotting sheet. It is preparation. Her gaze flicked to the paper and away. Too fast, too late. People write phrases, Adrian. We are a literate family. Did you write this? I have written many things. Did you write this? She smiled. You sound like father when a groom misplaced a saddle. Father disliked theft. Father disliked scandal more. That was the first true thing she had said since entering. Adrian folded the blotting sheet and placed it inside his portfolio. Lady Beatrice wrote to warn me about Harcourt. So she claims. The forged passage protects Harcourt by making her warning look like romantic pursuit, or her pursuit required a story once exposed. Adrian turned fully toward her. Careful, Maribel. Her smile vanished for an instant. You knew nothing of Lady Beatrice Vale last week. I know enough now to know someone used my seal to injure her. Your seal, she repeated softly. Listen to yourself. You are more offended by wax than by ambition. Ambition did not lift a seal. No, but it writes to dukes. He let the silence answer before he did. And contempt reads letters aloud. Color rose beneath her powder. If you mean to accuse me, do it plainly. Not yet. That unsettled her more than accusation would have. Adrian saw it, and it gave him no pleasure. Not until I know whether you were used, whether you used Harcourt, or whether you were foolish enough to mistake both for cleverness. Maribel drew herself upright. You forget you're speaking to your sister. No, that is why I have waited this long. She left then, graceful in retreat, but the door closed harder than she intended. Adrian remained in the room with the words in his portfolio, and the certainty that truth, once found, would not be merciful merely because it was family. By 4 o'clock, Mrs. Pike arrived with Lady Beatrice, under perfectly visible chaperonage, and Adrian received them in the small library rather than the room where the letter had been read. It was a deliberate choice. The library was quieter, lined with books no one had arranged for display, and its chairs allowed 3 people to sit without anyone appearing summoned. Beatrice wore a dark green walking dress and a bonnet tied plainly beneath her chin. She looked composed. Adrian had begun to understand that composure in her was not absence of feeling. It was feeling trained not to inconvenience anyone until it nearly disappeared. Your Grace, she said. Lady Beatrice, Mrs. Pike. Aunt Rosamond looked around the room. A library, how refreshing. One hopes paper behaves better when bound. Adrian almost smiled. Almost. He placed the blotting sheet on the table between them, turned so Beatrice could see it only if she wished. I found a phrase pressed into this sheet. I will not ask you to read it unless you choose. Beatrice's gloved hand tightened once in her lap. Then she leaned forward. Her eyes moved over the reversed marks, and he watched the moment recognition entered without welcome. That is the forged line. Yes, here, at a Montclair correspondence table. She sat back slowly. The wound was not theatrical. It was worse. It was silent enough to be missed by anyone who did not care to see it. Then whoever did this did not merely alter a letter. They practiced becoming me. Adrian felt the sentence strike harder than the evidence had. Yes, he said, they did. Aunt Rosamond's fan remained closed, and Harcourt... Adrian looked at Beatrice. I have heard Lord Harcourt use a close version of this phrase before. Not in admiration, in contempt. Beatrice's face changed, though she tried to prevent it. At Lady Bexley's, he said something similar. Adrian waited. He had learned already that haste made truth feel like interrogation. It was in the conservatory, she said. There were people close enough that I could not call for help without making myself ridiculous, but not close enough to hear him clearly. He said my family could not afford pride. He said I should be grateful a gentleman noticed me before I became invisible altogether. Aunt Rosamond made a sound low in her throat. Adrian did not trust himself to speak at once. Rage, when it came from rank, could easily become another force pressing Beatrice into silence. He chose precision. Did he touch you? No. Her answer came quickly. He stood too near. That was all. But he knew exactly how little a woman can object to. Before the room decides, she invited discomfort. Adrian looked down at the blotting sheet. The shape of the plot became clearer and uglier. Beatrice's warning had endangered Harcourt. Altering it had discredited her before she could be believed. Maribel had read it as discovery. Harcourt had benefited as if by accident. Accidents, Adrian had learned, rarely favored the innocent with such consistency. Lady Beatrice, he said, the letter you wrote was not a foolish risk. It was an attempt to put danger into words without being punished for speaking. Her eyes lifted to his. Something flickered there, fragile because it had been unused. And I was punished anyway. Yes. He would not soften it into comfort. But not finally. Before she could answer, a servant entered with visible reluctance, and a folded sheet on a salver. Adrian took it, read 3 lines, and felt the room alter around the paper. Aunt Rosamond saw his expression. Bad news travels with better posture than good news. He handed the sheet to her first, giving Beatrice the choice to look. It was a gossip notice, cheaply printed and already smudged by too many fingers. Near the center, one phrase stood out like a stain. The Duke's pleading correspondent. Beatrice read it. No tears came. Adrian wished absurdly that they had. Tears would have been easier to answer than the stillness that entered her face. So it is faster than we are, she said. Adrian folded the notice once. For the moment. Truth is often late, Aunt Rosamond said. It must dress properly before entering rooms where lies have already made themselves comfortable. Beatrice rose, not abruptly, but with decision. Then it should not be made to wait until everyone has finished laughing. Adrian looked at her, and the promise forming inside him changed shape. He had intended to gather proof first, quietly, perfectly. He saw now the danger in perfect timing. A woman could be ruined while honorable men arranged the facts. No, he said. It should not. Outside the library, Montclair House remained elegant and controlled. Inside it, the stolen phrase lay on the table, the gossip sheet beside it, and between them stood the truth of what had been done. The lie had not merely outrun them. It had been given a carriage, a driver, and an invitation to every breakfast room in London. By nightfall, Adrian had done everything a powerful man could do quietly, and almost nothing that Beatrice needed the world to see. He sent his secretary to the printer, named on the gossip notice, with instructions to learn who had supplied the phrase and when. He ordered the servants' entrance records brought from the house. Steward compared the hours of Maribel's notes and sent a discreet warning to 2 gentlemen at White's that Lord Harcourt was not to use the Duke of Calderwick's name in any matter, social or otherwise. He wrote 3 letters, sealed 2, and destroyed the 3rd, because it was addressed to Lady Beatrice, and would have reached her beneath the eyes of a mother, eager to turn any word from him into either salvation or blame. The unwritten truth remained more difficult than the written one. He wanted to go to Vale House at once, to stand before Lady Fenwick, and say plainly that Beatrice had been wronged, that Harcourt was suspect, that Maribel had lied by omission, if not by ink. Yet every public action available to him carried a hook. A second visit so soon after the first would be called attachment. A written defense would be called confession. A carriage at her door would become proof that the forged sentence had succeeded where Beatrice's dignity had failed. So Adrian chose strategy. He chose careful pressure, private inquiries, and the gathering of proof strong enough that no hostess could laugh it away. It was a rational decision. That was the danger of it. Rational decisions could still leave a woman alone in a room full of people who had stopped waiting for facts. Near 10 o'clock, Maribel entered his study without invitation, dressed for the evening in white silk and pearls, as if innocence were a garment that could be ordered from a modist. "You have made the house unpleasant," she said. Adrian did not look up from the delivery list. "Then the house is more honest than it was yesterday. Servants are whispering. Servants often notice what families prefer to miss." She moved nearer the desk. "If you continue pressing this, you will attach your name to hers so firmly that society will assume the worst and then congratulate itself on having been perceptive." He set down the paper. "Is that concern for me or warning for yourself?" Her smile did not reach her eyes. "I am the only one behaving as if your position matters. My position was used to frighten Lady Beatrice." "Lady Beatrice writes to dukes when frightened, apparently." Adrian rose. The motion was quiet, but Maribel stepped back before she meant to. "Do not test how far sisterhood will carry insult." Color touched her cheeks. "You have not called on her again." He said nothing, and in that silence she found the gap. "Ah, so even you see the danger." "I see many dangers." "Then perhaps you should let this end where it is." A regrettable confusion, a foolish letter. "A young lady spared by your restraint." She was not spared. She will be, if she is sensible enough to be grateful for silence. Adrian looked at her carefully. No one was ever restored by the same silence that harmed them. "Then call on her," Maribel said, too quickly. "Put your carriage at the door and watch what London does with that. You may enjoy finding out whether Lady Beatrice prefers vindication or a proposal forced by gossip." The words were meant to provoke him into error. Their cruelty lay in the fact that they were not wholly false. Adrian dismissed her. She left with the smallest curtsy, victorious enough to be graceful. Alone again, he looked at the letter he had not sent to Beatrice. Its seal remained unpressed. He told himself that waiting until proof hardened was protection. By morning, London had decided his waiting meant rejection. At Vale House, the proof of it arrived on visiting cards that never became visits. A note from Lady Hartmere expressed regret for a headache that had not prevented her carriage from being seen in Bond Street. Mrs. Anstruther wrote that crowded rooms were unwise for those temporarily observed. Lady Fenwick read the phrase aloud twice, each time with greater injury to herself than sympathy for her daughter. "Temporarily observed," she said. "We are objects now." Beatrice sat at the writing desk in the morning room, the copybook closed before her. She had slept little. The absence of rest had not made the world sharper. It had made it quieter, as if every insult came wrapped in cotton and still found skin. "I was an object last night," she said. "You told me to sit near the sofa." Lady Fenwick turned from the window. "Do not be clever. Cleverness has not improved your position. Nor has obedience. The Duke has not called." The words were chosen for their weight. Beatrice felt them land despite herself. "He called yesterday. Before the gossip sheet." Lady Fenwick folded another note. "A gentleman who intends to defend a lady does not vanish when her name is printed." Beatrice had no answer that did not cost her pride. She had told herself she expected nothing. She had even believed it for several hours, yet memory had become inconvenient. Adrian not reading the forged line aloud. Adrian asking her permission before touching her desk. Adrian saying that Lady Beatrice was wounded by certainty before anyone bothered with suspicion. Those memories had built a small shelter she had not consented to need. Now society pressed its fingers against the roof. Aunt Rosamond, seated near the hearth, looked up from her embroidery. "His Grace may be moving where we cannot see." Lady Fenwick sniffed. Invisible assistance is remarkably similar to no assistance. Beatrice hated that the sentence hurt because it contained a splinter of truth. "What do you require of me?" she asked. "This evening Lady Bexley holds a musicale. We will attend." "Tonight, yes." Absence would look like confession. Presence will look like appetite for punishment. Presence will look like composure. You will speak little, smile when spoken to, and give no one cause to say you have been abandoned. Abandoned. Beatrice looked down at her hands. They were steady. That, at least, still belonged to her. "Very well," she said. Aunt Rosamond's needle paused. "I shall attend too." Lady Fenwick's mouth tightened. "That is not necessary. Neither is arsenic, yet." People persist in serving it socially. By 9 that evening, Lady Bexley's rooms glittered with the same kind of light that had made Montclair House beautiful before it became cruel. Beatrice entered between her mother and Aunt Rosamond with her head lifted and her pulse behaving like a trapped bird. The first humiliation was small. Lady Hartmere began to extend a greeting, then remembered her headache and turned it into a gesture toward her own necklace. The second came from 2 girls near the pianoforte, one whispering, pleading correspondent, before her companion pressed a fan to her lips. The third was not a word at all. It was the narrow space that opened around Beatrice wherever she stood, too polite to be a shunning, and too exact to be accident. She endured each one because there was no dignified way to object to a wound. Everyone pretended not to give. Across the room, Adrian stood beside Lady Octavia Quenby. Maribel was near them, smiling as if the arrangement had been painted for approval. Lady Octavia looked proper, lovely, and uncomplicated by scandal. Adrian's gaze found Beatrice's. For one breath, the room seemed to still between them. He looked as though he wished to cross it. Then Lord Bexley spoke to him. Maribel touched Lady Octavia's sleeve, and Adrian remained where he was. Beatrice turned away before anyone could see the movement hurt. "How brave of you to come," Maribel said, appearing at her side with perfect timing. Beatrice looked at her. "How practiced of you to say so." Maribel's smile sharpened. "Careful, my dear. Pride is expensive when one has little else." Before Beatrice could answer, Lord Edwin Harcourt approached through the gap society had made for him. He bowed with the ease of a man who mistook access for welcome. "Lady Beatrice," he said, offering his hand as the musicians began a country dance. "Don't tell me you're refusing all friends tonight. Surely you'll grant me this dance." For one terrible moment, Beatrice saw every path Lord Edwin Harcourt had prepared for her. If she accepted his hand, the room would sigh with relief and decide that whatever had passed between them had been exaggerated by her nerves. If she refused, she would become difficult, ungracious, perhaps guilty. The music had begun with that cheerful cruelty only dance music could possess, bright enough to make humiliation look like entertainment. Edwin's hand remained extended. He wore a smile that said the answer had already been arranged. Lady Maribel stood a few feet away with her fan half lifted, watching as if she had set a snare and now expected the bird to admire the ribbon. Lady Fenwick's eyes commanded obedience from across the room. Aunt Rosamond's did not. Aunt Rosamond simply watched, as if waiting to see whether Beatrice would recognize the door that had opened inside herself. Beatrice looked at Edwin's hand. Then she looked at his face. No, the word was not loud. It did not need to be. The couple nearest them missed a step. Edwin's smile tightened, but he kept his hand out, making her refusal appear incomplete. "No," he said lightly. "My dear Lady Beatrice, I've asked for a dance, not a confession." "I know what you asked for. Then perhaps you misunderstood the courtesy." "No." This time the word rang clearer. "I understood you perfectly." A hush spread outward from them, moving faster than the music could cover. Edwin lowered his hand at last. His eyes, so easy a moment before, became flatter. After recent events, one might think you would welcome a friend. A friend does not make himself necessary by first making a woman unsafe. The color in his face rose. That is an ugly accusation to make in a ballroom. This is not a ballroom. It is Lady Bexley's drawing room. She felt the absurd precision steady her, and I made no accusation. I declined a dance. Someone behind her drew in a breath. Lady Fenwick stepped forward, but Aunt Rosamond intercepted her with the elegance of an elderly battleship changing course. Edwin gave a soft laugh. You have grown bold since finding yourself the subject of sympathy. No, Beatrice said. I have grown tired of mistaking fear for politeness. His gaze sharpened. Be cautious. Words can be misread. You know that better than most. The room seemed to lean closer. The music continued, though the dancers had lost the pattern, drifting into awkward motion around a still center. Beatrice heard the threat beneath his tone. Letters, words, misreading. He wanted to remind her that her own hand had already been used against her. He wanted her to retreat into the habit of survival. She thought of the missing page, the red wax, the phrase pressed into blotting paper. She thought of her mother telling her truth was not useful. Then she looked at Edwin and saw, with a clarity that almost calmed her, that men like him relied on women, valuing peace more than themselves. I do not dance with gentlemen who mistake fear for invitation. The sentence silenced even those who had pretended not to listen. Edwin's expression changed before he could stop it. Anger crossed his face, quick and plain, then vanished under a brittle smile. How dramatic. You flatter yourself if you imagine I have pursued you with such devotion. I imagine very little where you are concerned. A murmur moved through the room, sharper now, less amused. Maribel stepped forward. Lady Beatrice, this is unnecessary. Beatrice did not turn toward her. So was the reading of my letter. The blow landed. Maribel's fan snapped shut. Edwin recovered enough to bow with insulting grace. I see. We are all to be punished, because one letter did not produce the result its writer expected. Beatrice felt the old shame reach for her throat. She refused it. You seem very familiar with the contents of a letter you claim not to have caused. Edwin's eyes flicked, just once, toward Maribel. It was small. It was enough. A new silence formed, different from the first. Adrian had started moving before anyone fully noticed him. He crossed the room from Lady Octavia's side without hurry, but every person gave way. Beatrice knew he had seen the glance. She also knew, with a pain she had not invited, that he had seen too late what his absence had allowed. He stopped beside her, not in front of her. The distinction mattered so much that she almost looked away. Harcourt, Adrian said. Edwin bowed. Your Grace, I fear Lady Beatrice has taken a simple invitation in a rather severe spirit. I heard enough to judge the spirit in which it was offered. Then you heard a lady refuse civility. I heard a gentleman press after being refused. Edwin's mouth tightened. Surely a dance hardly requires inquiry. This one does. Adrian's voice remained low. How did you know the letter had not produced the result its writer expected? Edwin's face stilled. The question was exact, and exact things were dangerous in rooms built for suggestion. It was a manner of speaking. Was it? Everyone has heard some version of the matter. Not everyone has used. Phrases from the altered passage before the gossip sheet could carry them. The silence deepened. Edwin looked once more toward Maribel, and this time several people saw it. Maribel moved quickly, her smile returning with force. Adrian, don't turn Lady Bexley's music-hale into an inquest. Poor Lady Beatrice has had enough attention. Beatrice finally turned to her. Poor Lady Beatrice has had quite enough people deciding what is best for her attention. Lady Bexley, pale with horror at the prospect of scandal becoming seated rather than passing through, fluttered near the pianoforte. Perhaps refreshments might restore the mood. Aunt Rosamond answered without looking at her. Truth often spoils a mood before improving a room. Adrian's eyes remained on Edwin. Answer the question. Edwin gave a short laugh that failed to become convincing. Your Grace, if I have repeated gossip, I am guilty of nothing more than having ears. The lady herself wrote to you. The lady wrote to warn me that you were using my name. A visible shock moved through those close enough to hear. Until that moment, many had known only the delicious version, a pleading letter, a duke embarrassed, a quiet lady exposed. Now the shape of another story appeared, and it did not flatter the listeners. Edwin's smile faded. That is her interpretation. It is my statement. Adrian did not raise his voice, but the words carried authority enough to make argument smaller. Maribel's eyes flashed. Adrian, you cannot know that. I know Harcourt had no permission to use my name. I know Lady Beatrice's letter was opened and altered. I know my household wax appeared on a seal she says she did not use. And now I know Harcourt speaks as if he knew the forged meaning before he should have known any meaning at all. Beatrice felt the room shifting, not yet toward belief, but away from easy laughter. It was a strange sensation, standing at the center of a scandal and feeling for the first time that scandal might not belong entirely to her. Edwin bowed again, but the movement had lost its polish. If my presence offends, I shall withdraw. No, Adrian said. You will remain available. Edwin's eyes hardened. Am I under command? Under observation? Aunt Rosamond gave a soft sound that might have been approval. Maribel stepped between the men with practiced grace. Enough. Lady Beatrice, surely you do not wish to be discussed further before everyone here. Beatrice looked at the faces around her, some avid, some embarrassed, some newly uncertain. Then she looked at Adrian. His expression held apology, though he had not spoken it yet. She wanted to punish him for arriving late. She wanted to thank him for standing correctly when he arrived. Both desires were dangerous, and neither mattered as much as the truth. I did not wish to be discussed when you read my letter, she said to Maribel. Yet here we are. Maribel's smile trembled. Adrian turned slightly toward Beatrice, lowering his voice so that it reached her more than the room. I should not have left you to stand alone. The words were simple. They did not excuse. That made them harder to dismiss. Beatrice met his eyes. No, Your Grace, you should not have. Pain crossed his face, quick and controlled. He accepted the rebuke without defense, and the acceptance unsettled her more than protest would have done. I won't do it again, he said. She believed he meant it. She was not yet certain meaning was enough. Lady Bexley finally succeeded in sending servants through with trays, and the musicians stumbled into a softer air, but the evening had already broken. Edwin withdrew only as far as the card-room door. Maribel remained smiling with too much brightness. Lady Octavia looked at Adrian, as if seeing for the first time that suitability could not compete with courage. Beatrice stood where Edwin had tried to make her choose between shame and obedience, and found that she had chosen neither. She had chosen herself, and because of that choice, the room could no longer pretend the lie had no accomplices. The room repaired itself because society disliked visible damage. Within 10 minutes, Lady Bexley's servants had moved among the guests with wine, negus, and little plates of sugared biscuits, as if refreshments could teach a scandal to behave. The musicians began again, softer this time, and conversations rose in careful layers. Yet the air had changed. People no longer watched Beatrice with the easy cruelty of those certain they were safe in their judgment. They watched Edwin Harcourt, too. They watched Lady Maribel. They watched the Duke of Calderwick, who remained near Beatrice, long enough that no one could mistake his position, and not so near that anyone could call it possession. That restraint unsettled Beatrice more than gallantry would have done. A dramatic rescue might have allowed her pride to reject him. This was harder. Adrian had stood beside her, accepted her rebuke, and remained without demanding gratitude. Lady Maribel understood the danger of that before anyone else did. Beatrice saw it in the way Maribel's fan closed against her palm, in the swift glance she cast toward Lady Octavia Quenby, and in the bright smile she offered a circle of matrons who had suddenly become less eager to agree with her. Adrian saw it too. His attention moved over the room with cold precision, then returned to Beatrice. "I must speak with my sister." Beatrice's heart tightened, though her face remained composed. "Of course, Your Grace." He heard the distance. She knew because something in his expression changed. Not enough for the room, but enough for her. This will not be another silence. It must not be another arrangement made above my head. No. His answer came without delay. It won't. Then he bowed and crossed the room toward Maribel, leaving Beatrice with Aunt Rosamond and the unpleasant awareness that trust could begin before forgiveness did. Lady Fenwick approached with anger arranged as concern. "You have made yourself the subject of every conversation here. Lord Harcourt assisted. You refused him in public." "Yes," her mother's eyes sharpened. "A young woman does not preserve herself by making declarations in crowded rooms." Aunt Rosamond opened her fan. "No. She preserves herself by allowing gentlemen to rewrite her history, while hostesses admire the penmanship." Lady Fenwick ignored her. "The Duke will not thank you for forcing him into conflict with his own sister." Beatrice looked toward the doorway, through which Adrian and Maribel had gone. Then he should not have noticed the seal. Lady Fenwick lowered her voice. "Do not become proud because a powerful man paid attention for one evening." The words found an old bruise because they were not wholly foolish. Attention was not loyalty. Protection was not partnership. A duke could stand beside a woman in one room and leave her to burn in the next if family pride required it. "I am not proud," Beatrice said. "I am listening. To whom? To what people do when truth becomes inconvenient." Lady Fenwick drew back as if the answer had been indecent. Aunt Rosamond's hand brushed Beatrice's sleeve once, a small signal of approval. Across the hall, in Lady Bexley's smaller supper room, Adrian did not let Maribel arrange the battlefield. She had taken her place beneath a gilt mirror where candlelight favored her. One shoulder turned, as if wounded by the necessity of conversation. Lady Octavia lingered near the door, pale and uncertain. Adrian spared her without softness. "Lady Octavia, forgive me. I require a private word with my sister." Lady Octavia curtsied and escaped. Maribel watched her go. "You embarrass everyone you mean to defend." "No. You bring them into embarrassment and call it loyalty. I bring suitable people near you because someone must." Adrian left. The door opened by the few inches propriety required in another person's house. "Did you open Lady Beatrice's letter?" Maribel laughed. "We're beginning there. We are ending there if you answer truthfully. Then I shall disappoint you." "No, Adrian, I did not open it. Did you read it before the music-hale?" She adjusted a spoon on the sideboard, though it had not moved from its place. "A letter addressed to you was placed where anyone might see it." If Lady Beatrice valued privacy, she chose a curious method. "That is not an answer." Maribel turned then, and sweetness fell from her face in one clean break. "Very well. Here is an answer. She is beneath you." Adrian went still. "Be careful. I have been careful for years. I have kept Montclair House from ambitious mothers, painted daughters, and quiet little women who turn wounded eyes into ladders. Lady Beatrice is no different. You know nothing of her. I know her father is in debt. I know her mother is desperate. I know she has no beauty fashionable enough to protect her and no fortune large enough to excuse her. Then one letter is read, and suddenly she has your attention. Someone made that letter a weapon. Someone revealed what she wrote. Someone altered it. Maribel's mouth hardened. You believe. That because you want to. I believe it because Wax, Hand, and Harcourt's panic all speak more honestly than you are speaking now. Lord Harcourt is foolish. Foolish men are often useful too. Clever women. Her eyes flashed. You accuse me and call it inquiry. I am giving you the courtesy of a chance you did not give Lady Beatrice. Maribel stepped closer, her voice low. You owe the family more than scandal over an overlooked earl's daughter. Lady Octavia is suitable. She understands rank. She would strengthen us. I am not a vacant chair for you to place beside your friends. You are a duke. You seem determined to forget what that means. And you seem determined to forget what honor means when it inconveniences the family. Beatrice heard the last words from the passage outside the supper room. She had not meant to listen. Lady Bexley's footman had directed her and Aunt Rosamond toward the side corridor for quieter air, and then Maribel's voice had stopped her as surely as a hand on her arm. Beneath you. Overlooked earl's daughter. No beauty, no fortune. The phrases entered quietly because they had been prepared rooms in her for years. Beatrice should have stepped away. Instead, she remained one moment longer because ugly truth was still truth, and women were too often kept ignorant of the contempt shaping their lives. Adrian's voice came again, colder now. Lady Beatrice is not beneath honesty, Maribel answered sharply. Don't make her into a virtue, because she has been insulted, she has been wronged. And you will make a wife of every woman who is wronged in your drawing room. Silence followed. It lasted too long. Beatrice felt it like a door half opened. Maribel felt it too. Her voice changed. Adrian, he did not answer. If you force this, Maribel said, I will not be the only person embarrassed. Lady Beatrice has written other letters, older ones, softer ones. She may not enjoy hearing all her private feelings defended before witnesses. Beatrice's breath stopped. Aunt Rosamond's fingers closed around her sleeve and drew her back before sound betrayed her. They returned to the edge of the hall, just as Adrian opened the supper room door. He saw Beatrice at once. He knew she had heard enough. That knowledge moved across his face before his control returned. Maribel emerged behind him, with serenity restored like a mask pressed over wet paint. Lady Beatrice, she said gently, you look pale. I do hope this evening hasn't been too much. The old answer rose in Beatrice. No, not at all. Forgive me, I am perfectly well. She let it die before it reached her mouth. I have endured more than your concern, Lady Maribel. Maribel's eyes brightened with hatred dressed as pity. Then perhaps you should rest before you say something unwise. Adrian stepped forward. Maribel. Beatrice lifted one hand, not touching him, only stopping him before the room could call his voice hers. No, Your Grace. Let her speak plainly if she is able. For one heartbeat, the three of them stood in a triangle of candlelight and consequence. Maribel smiled. Plainly? Very well. You have mistaken an investigation for admiration. Don't make that error too costly. She turned away, her skirts whispering over the floor like the closing of a curtain. Beatrice watched her go with a calm that felt borrowed from a future self. Adrian faced her. I am sorry you heard that. I am not. Surprise crossed his eyes. You are not? No. It is useful to know what people believe I am worth. My sister's judgment is not mine, but her name is yours. The words struck him. Beatrice heard how intimate and wounded they sounded, and wished she had shaped them differently. Then she decided not to apologize for truth, simply because it had edges. You said this would not be managed above my head. Yet when she threatens another letter, your first instinct will be to contain her privately. I can prevent her from harming you further. Can you? She held his gaze. You tried to protect me privately today. By tonight, Lord Harcourt had me in the center of a room with his hand out. Pain crossed his face. That is true. Then understand me, Your Grace. I do not require a hiding place. I require the truth to stand where the lie stood. He accepted the blow without defense, and that restraint nearly undid her. You shall have it. Not as a gift from you. Her voice softened, which made the words more final. As a choice from me. Aunt Rosamond stepped forward, her expression sharpened by thought. Then we need not depend entirely upon anyone's generosity. Adrian turned to her. Mrs. Pike, my late husband collected household oddities, seal impressions, wax records, old family marks. Useless things, I called them, when I wished to irritate him. Your red wax may not be as common as your sister hopes. Beatrice looked from her aunt to Adrian. The night shifted again, not healed. Not safe sharpened. Adrian did not ask whether he should proceed. He waited. The choice was hers. Beatrice glanced toward the rooms where Maribel smiled, where Edwin retreated, where society waited to be told what to believe. Then she lifted her chin. Then we shall look at the records. Pike House did not look like a place where a powerful family might be undone. It stood in a quieter street off Portman Square, narrow-fronted, well-kept, and respectable in the way of houses owned by widows who had learned to survive without asking permission. By noon the next day, it had become the first room in London where Beatrice could breathe without being arranged. Lady Fenwick had objected to her leaving Vale House after Lady Bexley's music hale, of course. She had called it dramatic. She had called it disobedient. She had called it an invitation to further gossip. Aunt Rosamond had replied that gossip had already accepted the invitation, eaten the supper, and stayed the night. Then she had placed Beatrice in her carriage, with all the calm authority of a woman who had long ago stopped confusing family peace with moral order. Now Beatrice sat in the back parlor of Pike House, her gloves folded on her lap, while Aunt Rosamond unlocked a shallow leather box from the cabinet beside the bookcase. The house smelled faintly of beeswax, tea, and dried lavender. It was not grand, but it had a steadiness that Vale House had not possessed in years. No one had asked Beatrice to apologize before sitting down. No one had told her which expression would best preserve the family. That alone felt almost indecently kind. Do not look so solemn, Aunt Rosamond said, setting the box on the table. Records prefer confidence. They have spent their lives waiting for people to become foolish enough to need them. Beatrice looked at the cracked leather lid. Can an old record truly matter? Not alone. Very few things do. A record matters when it stands beside a servant's memory, a gentleman's lie, and a woman who refuses to be quiet. She opened the box. Inside lay folded papers, small cards bearing seal impressions, and bits of hardened wax wrapped in aging paper. It was not the vast archive Beatrice had imagined. It was more intimate than that, a private history of households and habits, the kind women preserved when men thought them merely sentimental. Aunt Rosamond unfolded one sheet and pointed with the tip of her spectacles. Vale blue, Fenwick green before your grandfather changed suppliers. Pike black, because my late husband believed correspondence should look as cheerless as a sermon. And here, she drew out a card with a deep red impression pressed into it. Montclair ceremonial red. Distinctive enough to matter, though not enough to hang a soul by itself. Beatrice leaned closer. The color was rich, dark, and familiar now in the worst possible way. Not common sealing red, not the bright wax schoolgirls might use for pretty notes. This was the red that had closed over her letter after someone opened it, the red that had carried the Montclair crest where her blue wax should have been. "It matches," she said. "Closely," Aunt Rosamond corrected. "Never make certainty work harder than necessary. It aligns with what His Grace already saw." A knock came before Beatrice could answer. The maid entered with a card. Aunt Rosamond read it and gave Beatrice a look that was almost amused. "The Duke arrives with admirable haste for a man pretending to be patient." Beatrice's pulse shifted. She disliked that it did. "Did you send for him?" "I sent word that I had found the record." Men of consequence enjoy being summoned by facts. It keeps them from noticing they are being managed by old women. Adrian entered moments later, bowing first to Aunt Rosamond and then to Beatrice. His face was composed, but fatigue shadowed his eyes. He had not slept well. Beatrice knew it before she wished to know it. His gaze rested on her for the length of one quiet question. "Are you safe here?" she answered with the smallest movement of her head. "Yes." Only then did he turn to the table. Aunt Rosamond placed the red impression beside the note he had brought from his coat, a small wrapped scrap from the broken seal. He examined them without touching Beatrice's side of the table. That restraint had become one of his languages. "It is Montclair wax," he said, "the same household red. Distinctive enough to support a pattern," Aunt Rosamond said. "Not a solitary miracle. There is no need for a miracle." Adrian unfolded a cloth from his pocket. Inside lay a small silver-handled seal knife. It looked harmless, almost delicate. A lady might have used such a thing to lift paper, trim ribbon, or open a note. Near the hinge, a trace of dark red wax had lodged where wiping had failed. Beatrice felt the room narrow around it. "Where was that found?" she asked. "In my sister's writing table." He said it evenly. That made the pain more visible, not less. "A housemaid remembers Lady Maribel requesting it from my writing table the morning before the music hall. She claimed a ribbon had frayed. The knife was returned late." "Not cleanly." Aunt Rosamond leaned back. "A ribbon. How generous of ribbons to offer themselves as excuses." Adrian did not smile. "There is more." He looked at Beatrice before continuing, and she understood that he was asking without words whether she wished to hear it. She gave him permission with a nod. "In the same writing table I found wax crumbs and torn practice fragments. Not enough to make a page whole. Enough to show copied phrases in a hand resembling yours." Beatrice's fingers curled once against her skirt, then stilled. She had known someone had studied her writing. Still, hearing where the remnants had been found changed knowledge into consequence. In Maribel's table, in Adrian's house, within the household whose crest had been pressed over her altered words. "My hand," she said. "Borrowed badly," Aunt Rosamond replied. "No," Beatrice said softly. "Borrowed cruelly." Adrian looked down at the seal knife. I would rather any other answer had been possible. The words were not for forgiveness. They were confession. Beatrice saw then what this proof cost him. For her it opened a path back to her name. For him it cut into family. A sister was not only a villain when named aloud. She was memory, childhood, duty, dinners, griefs shared before either person understood the world. Beatrice had no wish to spare Maribel from truth, but neither could she pretend truth would wound only the guilty. "Your Grace," she said, "if this is brought into the open, Lady Maribel will suffer." "Yes, and so will you." "Yes." He did not dress the answer in nobility. That made it harder to dismiss. "I do not want revenge." Beatrice said, "I want my name restored. I want Lord Harcourt stopped. I want no other woman to have her private words turned into a cage. But I do not want to become someone who takes pleasure in another woman's ruin." Adrian's expression changed, not to tenderness exactly, but to something that honored tenderness by refusing to cheapen it. "Justice need not be cruel," he said, "but it must be clear. The sentence settled over the table, among the records, the red wax, and the small silver knife. Clear. That was what had been denied her. Everything had been made blurred. Warning into confession, silence into guilt, family control into care, cruelty into concern. Beatrice looked at the copied fragments, then at the old record. A private apology will not be enough. No, Adrian said. If the lie stood in company, truth must stand there too. Aunt Rosamond nodded once. Lady Penrith holds a morning call tomorrow. Half the women who heard the first account will be present. Lady Maribel has been invited. Lady Octavia as well. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Harcourt, he will attend if he believes Lady Beatrice may be discussed, Aunt Rosamond said. Vanity is the most reliable carriage in London. Beatrice almost smiled. It vanished quickly because fear returned in a new shape. A public room again. Fans' eyes, smiles polished over appetite. If we go, she said, they will expect me to hide behind your rank. Adrian looked at her. Then I will give them no such satisfaction. And if I choose to speak, I will listen. The answer was simple. It reached farther than a promise, because it did not try to impress her. Before Beatrice could reply, the maid entered with a folded note on a tray. For Lady Beatrice, ma'am. Delivered by hand, the paper was thick. The fold was elegant. A faint scent of violets rose before Beatrice opened it. She knew the hand before the words fully formed. Come tomorrow, or I shall read the other letter. For a moment, there was only the mantel clock, ticking with dreadful politeness. Aunt Rosamond's face hardened. Adrian extended his hand, palm upward, not taking the note, offering to receive it if she chose. That small courtesy cut through the panic. Beatrice looked again at the words. The other letter. A private wound she had buried so long ago that even she had nearly mistaken burial for peace. Maribel had found it. Of course she had. Cruel people always searched for the place where shame had learned to sleep. Beatrice placed the note in Adrian's hand, not because she surrendered the burden, but because this time she wanted a witness from the beginning. Then tomorrow, she said, her voice steadying as she spoke, I shall come before she calls it courage. The other letter frightened Beatrice more than the forged one, because it did not contain a lie. A lie could be challenged. A lie could be placed beside wax, hand, and witness until it began to crack. The old letter held something less defensible. Not guilt, not impropriety, but a young woman's loneliness written before she had learned to fold loneliness into acceptable shapes. Lady Maribel's note remained on Aunt Rosamond's table between the seal knife and the record of Montclair wax, a small, elegant threat among objects that had already proved too much. Adrian had read it once, and then placed it down without comment, as if any first word might trespass. Aunt Rosamond stood near the hearth, one hand resting on the mantel, her face composed but fierce around the eyes. Beatrice looked at the note until the letters seemed to lift from the paper. Come tomorrow, or I shall read the other letter. It is mine, she said. Adrian looked at her steadily. You do not have to explain it before you choose to. That almost undid her. She had prepared herself for questions, for suspicion, even for gallant assurances that it could not matter. Permission to remain silent made speech possible. I wrote it when I was 19, she said. There was a gentleman in Somerset, Mr. Lionel Avery, the second son of a baronet. He was civil, attentive in the careless way young men can afford when nothing is expected of them. I believed it meant more than it did. Aunt Rosamond turned slightly toward the fire, giving Beatrice a privacy made of posture. Adrian did not look away. He did not stare either. He simply attended. He married an heiress before the season ended, Beatrice continued. I did not write to him. I wrote after I heard. A letter to no one, perhaps, to myself. I wrote that I had imagined being chosen. I wrote that perhaps some women survived by learning to want less. I wrote that invisibility might be safer if one could stop hoping to be seen. Her voice remained steady until the final word. Then it thinned. She folded her hands. It is not wicked, it is only humiliating. Adrian's expression changed with such control that only the silence showed the force of it. Humiliation is often what cruel people use when wickedness is unavailable. Aunt Rosamond exhaled. A precise summary of civilization. Beatrice almost smiled, but Maribel's note lay too close. I kept the letter inside an old volume in my desk. I had forgotten it for years, or I had pretended to forget it. When the practice sheet was taken, she must have found it too. Then I will prevent tomorrow's call, Adrian said. The words came too quickly for calculation. Lady Penrith can be asked to postpone. Maribel can be kept from attending. Harcourt can be turned away before he reaches the door. You can do all of that? Yes, and after? He did not answer at once. Beatrice rose, because sitting made fear feel like submission. Afterward, Lady Maribel will still have the letter. Lord Harcourt will still have the story he prefers. Society will still believe there is some deeper shame I was too frightened to face. You would be spared the moment. No, I would be spared the sight of the knife. Not the wound. Adrian stepped toward her, then stopped himself with visible effort. That restraint had become more intimate than movement. Lady Beatrice, I do not want you made a spectacle again, nor do I. She looked at the paper. But I am beginning to understand that hiding from a room does not mean the room has stopped judging me. I can stand between you and it. That is what frightens me. His eyes sharpened with pain. My protection frightens you, not because it is cruel. Her voice softened, because it is kind enough to become another lock before either of us notices. Aunt Rosamond remained very still. Adrian received the sentence as he had received her rebuke at Lady Bexley's, without defense, which made him harder to resist and more necessary to test. Beatrice continued before courage failed. All my life, people have protected me by deciding what I must not say. My mother protected me by teaching silence. My father protected me by looking away. Society protects women by telling them a public wound becomes worse if they name the hand that made it. I cannot accept a finer cage simply because a duke holds the key with gentler fingers. The room seemed to draw one long breath. Adrian looked not offended, but altered. That was not what I intended, I know, but intention does not alter the lock, he said quietly. The fact that he had learned the sentence before she could repeat it herself reached some place in her that had been waiting too long for understanding. Beatrice turned toward the table. Tomorrow, I will go to Lady Penrith's morning call. Aunt Rosamond nodded once, as if the decision had been obvious from the moment the note arrived. Adrian's face tightened. Every eye in that room will be waiting for you to falter. Then I shall disappoint them. Maribel will try to read it. Then I will speak first. Beatrice lifted her chin. I will say I wrote it when I was young and wounded. I will say private feeling does not become public shame because someone else steals it. I will say loneliness is not guilt. Aunt Rosamond's fan opened and shut once. Good, make them choke on their own memories. Adrian looked from the old threat to Beatrice. And the altered letter? You may present it after I have spoken. After? Yes. Why? Because I will not have my dignity depend entirely upon proof that another person behaved shamefully. The proof matters. It will restore what was taken. But I must stand before it, not hide behind it. For the first time that day, Adrian's severity broke enough to reveal something warmer beneath. Not relief, respect with feeling under it. Then I will bring Mr. Alden. He can speak to the seal, the wax, and the comparison of hands without turning Lady Penrith's drawing room into a court. And you? Beatrice asked. I will be there. That is not what I mean. He waited. She forced herself to be exact. You must not speak for me unless I ask. You must not soften Lady Maribel's guilt, because she is your sister. You must not decide at the final moment that Montclair pride is more delicate than my name. The words hurt him. She saw that they did, but hurt did not make them less necessary. Adrian bowed his head. You have my word. I won't speak unless you ask me to. And if the truth wounds your family, then my family will have to learn the difference between being wounded and being. Exposed Aunt Rosamond moved at last and poured tea with unnecessary firmness. Excellent. Moral revolution is always improved by tea. Beatrice, drink before you become heroic on an empty stomach. Beatrice accepted the cup, and her hand trembled once before steadying. Tomorrow waited like a room already full of eyes. Yet beneath the fear, another feeling stirred. It was not confidence, it was ownership. The old letter no longer belonged only to Maribel, because Maribel had stolen it. It would belong again to Beatrice, the moment she named it without bowing her head. The next morning, London looked innocent in the pale light, which seemed an insult and a mercy at once. Beatrice dressed simply, in grey silk with blue ribbons at the cuffs, and Aunt Rosamond inspected her bonnet, as if preparing a general for polite war. The altered letter rested in Beatrice's reticule, not hidden by Adrian, not carried by any man on her behalf. When they reached Lady Penrith's house, carriages already lined the street. Beatrice heard voices beyond the drawing-room door, bright, curious, sharpened by expectation. The footman announced her name. She entered with Aunt Rosamond at her side, and the broken seal letter in her own hand. Lady Maribel stood near the mantel, beautiful and ready. Lord Edwin Harcourt lingered by the window, pretending surprise. Adrian waited apart from both of them, silent because she had asked him to be. Every face turned. This time, Beatrice did not lower her eyes. She had brought the truth herself. Lady Penrith's drawing-room had been prepared for tea, not justice, but London had always preferred to pass judgment from comfortable chairs. Sunlight fell across pale carpets, porcelain cups, and polished tables arranged with pastries no one seemed inclined to eat. The guests had gathered under the harmless excuse of a morning call, yet every face turned toward Beatrice as if the true entertainment had finally arrived. She crossed the threshold with Aunt Rosamond at her side and the altered letter in her own hand, feeling the full weight of being looked at by people who had already practiced what they intended to think. Lady Penrith rose from her chair near the tea-table. She was small, silver-haired, and dressed in black lace that made her look less like a hostess than a verdict waiting for evidence. "Lady Beatrice," she said, "Mrs. Pike, I'm pleased you've come." Beatrice curtsied. "You are kind to receive us." Lady Penrith's eyes moved briefly to the letter. "Kindness is pleasant, my dear, but accuracy is more useful." That sentence travelled through the room with more force than a shout. Lady Maribel Montclair stood near the mantel in pale lavender silk, beautiful enough to make cruelty appear decorative. Lord Edwin Harcourt lingered by the window, turning his hat in one hand with studied ease. Lady Octavia Quenby sat beside an older countess, her face composed but tense. Adrian stood apart from all of them near the long windows, silent because Beatrice had asked him to be. He bowed when her eyes met his. He did not move toward her. The restraint steadied her. Maribel stepped forward with a folded paper between her fingers. "Lady Beatrice, I confess I admire your courage." Many ladies would have chosen privacy after such confusion. Beatrice felt the room sharpen at the word privacy. Privacy has already been mishandled. A fan paused. Maribel's smile held. Then perhaps honesty should be complete. She lifted the folded paper. Beatrice recognized it before it was opened. Not by sight alone, but by the sudden return of a younger self she had left sealed inside an old book. 19, disappointed, ashamed of having hoped. A candle guttering beside her hand, while she wrote words meant for no one. Maribel lowered her lashes with exquisite sorrow. I had hoped not to mention further correspondence, but as Lady Beatrice has come carrying letters, perhaps one more should not alarm her. Aunt Rosamond shifted, but Beatrice moved first. That letter is mine. The room stilled. Maribel blinked, the first true crack in her timing. You admit it? Yes. Beatrice turned away from Maribel and addressed the room, because the room had been made into the weapon. I wrote it when I was 19, after a gentleman I had believed attached to me married another woman. I did not send it. It was not addressed to him. It was a young woman's private grief, written because she had no safe place to put disappointment. A whisper started and died. Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held her head level. If Lady Maribel reads it, you will hear no impropriety. You will hear loneliness. You may find that laughable if you wish. But loneliness isn't guilt. Several women looked down. One older lady pressed her lips together, as if the sentence had touched a memory she did not want named. Lady Penrith's face did not soften, but her hand closed once around the handle of her teacup. Maribel's fingers tightened around the old letter. She had expected denial. She had expected tears. Beatrice had given her neither. How very affecting, Maribel said, yet the pattern remains. You write intensely, then insist the world has misunderstood you. No, Beatrice said. The pattern is that my private words keep appearing in hands that had no right to hold them. The whisper came again, lower this time and less pleased. Beatrice looked toward Adrian. Your Grace, you may present the altered letter. Only then did he move. He crossed the room with the controlled gravity that made everyone aware of his rank without making a show of it. He did not take the letter from Beatrice until she extended it to him. The simple exchange made the watching room quieter. Lady Penrith, he said, Mr. Alden is waiting in the hall. With your permission, he'll speak briefly to the condition of this letter. Lady Penrith inclined her head. Let him come in. Briefly is a virtue too few men practice. A restrained ripple of nervous amusement passed through the room and vanished when Mr. Alden entered. He was spare, grey-haired, and dressed with such plain correctness that he seemed made of paper, ink, and caution. He bowed, accepted the letter, and set it upon a small writing table cleared for him. He did not read the forged sentence aloud. Beatrice saw Adrian glance once toward her, as if to assure her that this omission had been intentional. Mr. Alden adjusted his spectacles. I have compared the letter's opening hand, final lines, fold, and seal. My opinion is limited, but clear. The letter was opened before its proper receipt. The seal was lifted and pressed again. The final lines are not a natural continuation of the earlier hand. Maribel gave a delicate laugh. How solemn! A seal breaks whenever a letter is read. Mr. Alden looked at her over his spectacles. Yes, Lady Maribel, it doesn't usually break twice in two directions. The room drew in one collective breath. Adrian spoke next, still measured. The wax used to reseal the letter is consistent with Montclair household red. Lady Beatrice's ordinary wax is blue. He stopped there, deliberately. The knife, the copied fragments, and the fuller proof remained unspoken for now. The purpose of this moment was not to bury the room beneath details. It was to make denial less comfortable. Edwin shifted near the window. Beatrice noticed because men who hoped to escape often moved before their courage gave them leave. Adrian noticed too. Harcourt, he said. Edwin stilled. Your Grace, you seem restless. Not at all. I merely thought the ladies might prefer fewer gentlemen present for such delicate conversation. Aunt Rosamond's voice cut in. You showed less delicacy when delicacy would have protected Lady Beatrice. Edwin's smile thinned. Mrs. Pike, I fear you're determined to think ill of me. I'm determined to think accurately. It is less exhausting. Lady Penrith's mouth twitched. Adrian took a folded gossip sheet from his coat and placed it beside the letter, still without expanding the matter beyond necessity. The phrase printed here reflects the forged sentiment closely. It reached the printer before most of London could have known the wording. Edwin's fingers tightened around his hat. Gossip travels quickly, not faster than ink that hasn't yet been read by enough mouths. Edwin looked toward Maribel. It was a mistake so small and so complete that even those who missed the logic understood the fear. Maribel's eyes warned him, but the room had seen. Lady Octavia lowered her gaze, color leaving her cheeks. Beatrice felt the first true turn in the air. Not belief, not yet. But uncertainty had entered the room and begun moving chairs. Maribel stepped forward, her softness turning bright at the edges. This is absurd. Lady Beatrice has played injury very beautifully, and now every ordinary fact is being bent to flatter her. She admits to writing emotional letters. She admits to private intensity. She wrote to my brother, and somehow I'm the one under suspicion because she looks pale while doing it. Beatrice did not flinch. I did not ask anyone to believe me because I am pale. I asked that the seal be examined because it was broken. Lady Penrith rose then, and the motion drew the room with her. A useful distinction. Maribel turned toward her, startled. Lady Penrith looked from the old letter in Maribel's hand to the altered one on the table. A lady's youthful sadness is not a public charge. An altered letter is. The words did more than defend Beatrice. They instructed the room on what sort of judgment would be fashionable now. Several women adjusted at once. Fans lowered. Eyes moved from Beatrice to Maribel. Edwin took another half step toward the door. Adrian's voice stopped him. Remain, Harcourt. Edwin laughed, but the sound cracked. Am I to be held prisoner over gossip? No one is holding you, but flight has a vocabulary of its own. Maribel's composure thinned. Adrian, you cannot mean to shame your own sister in Lady Penrith's drawing room. He looked at her, and the pain in his face was controlled enough to be devastating. I gave you chances not to require it. Require it? Her voice sharpened. You speak as if I am the danger, when the danger is standing there with a damaged reputation, a failing family, and a letter to a duke she had no business writing. Beatrice felt the old accusation forming before Maribel shaped it. Lady Fenwick's warnings, Harcourt's insinuations, society's favorite hunger. Maribel lifted her chin and let the word fall cleanly. Someone had to save you from a fortune hunter. The phrase did what it had been designed to do. Fortune hunter. It crossed Lady Penrith's drawing room with the old authority of an accusation society. Had rehearsed for generations, one polished. Enough to sound like caution and cruel enough to feed every appetite in the room. Beatrice felt the heat rise in her face, but it did not burn as it once would have. She had already named loneliness before them. She had already stood with her old letter exposed and found that she remained standing. Poverty, or the hint of it, could not shame her more deeply than stolen words had done. Lady Maribel saw the room pause and mistook that pause for victory. Yes, she said, her voice tremulous with righteous feeling. A fortune hunter, perhaps not a bold one. Perhaps not one with jewels or beauty enough to be obvious. But what else is a lady with a failing family, a weak dowry, and a private letter to a duke? A few faces shifted toward Beatrice. Not all were cruel, some were merely trained. That almost hurt more. Adrian moved half a step, but Beatrice lifted one hand. He stopped at once. The room saw it. His restraint became part of her answer. She turned to Maribel. If I wrote that ending, she said, clear enough for every corner of the room. Why was His Grace's seal broken before he received it? The question did not sparkle. It did not plead. It stood, plain and immovable, among porcelain cups and folded fans. Maribel's lips parted. No answer came. Beatrice continued, each question step away from the woman others had tried to make her. Why was my blue wax gone? Why was the Montclair crest pressed over a letter that left my desk without it? Why was a page taken from my copybook? Why did Lord Harcourt know phrases from the forged passage before the gossip sheet had carried them through London? Edwin Harcourt gave a short, thin laugh. This is becoming theatrical. Aunt Rosamond did not look at him when she replied. You should feel at home. Lady Penrith's mouth hardened. Mr. Alden stepped closer to the writing table and touched the altered letter only at the edge. Men who compare hands can be mistaken, he said in his dry, careful voice. That is why the hand should not be considered alone. The seal wax, fold, and final lines together show alteration. The first portion is natural. The last is imitation. Maribel lifted her chin. A solicitor's opinion is not scripture. No, Lady Penrith said. But it is more useful than malice. The room changed again. It was small, but Beatrice felt it. Lady Penrith had not merely permitted truth. She had begun to host it. Adrian unfolded a small cloth and placed the silver-handled seal knife beside the letter. It looked far too delicate for the damage it had done. This knife was taken from my writing table the morning before the musicale, he said. My sister requested it. It was returned with Montclair red wax, still caught near the hinge. Lady Maribel's face whitened beneath its color. You question servants against me. I questioned facts against falsehood. Servants misunderstand. Not as often as their betters require, Lady Penrith said. One of the older hostesses, seated beside the tea table, lowered her fan and looked directly at Maribel for the first time. Lady Maribel, did you handle the letter before it was read? Maribel turned toward her, startled by defection from a quarter she had expected to command. Lady Sefton, surely you don't imagine I would lower myself to such vulgar deceit. Lady Sefton did not smile. I imagine very little at present. I am listening. Lady Octavia Quenby rose slowly from her chair. Her hands were clasped so tightly that the knuckles showed pale through her gloves. Lady Maribel, she said, voice unsteady but audible. You told Lady Beatrice had written embarrassingly to His Grace. You said I should be present to see how unsuitable she was. You did not tell me the letter had been altered. Maribel's eyes flashed. Octavia sighed down. Lady Octavia did not. The refusal was quiet, but in that room it struck like a bell. Edwin shifted toward the door. Adrian did not turn his head. Harcourt. Edwin stopped, a flush creeping above his collar. Your Grace, I have no wish to be drawn into feminine hostilities. You entered them when you fed a gossip sheet. I repeated what I was told. By whom? Edwin looked at Maribel. This time he did not recover quickly enough. The whole room followed his glance. Maribel's composure cracked, then sealed itself with anger. Do not look at me like a whipped schoolboy. Edwin's vanity, cornered by fear, turned on the nearest hand that had used it. You gave me the phrases, he said. A shocked murmur ran through the room. He rushed on, as if speed might make betrayal sound reasonable. You said your brother needed protection from a scheming girl. You showed me copied lines and said, Lady Beatrice would be forced into quiet if the matter became public. You said she might then be grateful to a gentleman more suited to her station. Beatrice went very still. There it was, stripped of lace. They had not merely wanted to shame her. They had wanted to make shame useful. Maribel stared at Edwin with open contempt. Coward. No, Aunt Rosamond said. Axisy with late instincts. Lady Penrith rose. So did Lady Sefton. A third senior hostess, Mrs. Anstruther, who had written concern only that morning, looked down at her cup and then stood as well. The room understood before the words were spoken. Maribel understood too. Her power had depended on the room agreeing to be guided by her version. Now the room was withdrawing, chair by chair, glance by glance. "This is madness," Maribel said. "All of you are being managed by a girl who knows how to look wounded." Adrian looked at his sister, and grief entered his face so cleanly that Beatrice almost looked away. "Enough? No, not enough." Maribel's voice rose, still controlled but no longer graceful. "I kept your house. I received the mothers, the daughters, the widows who wanted influence, the men who wanted favors. I watched them measure you, Adrian. I protected what father left us. You protected your authority. I protected Montclair. By forging a lady's hand, by showing you what hunger looks like before it reached your altar." The word altar made several women glance away. Maribel heard herself too late. Her face tightened. Lady Octavia was suitable. She would have strengthened us. She would never have brought debts, pity, and scandal to your door. "No," Beatrice said. The quiet word turned the room back to her. Lady Octavia would have brought herself. "You brought scandal." Lady Octavia's eyes filled, but she did not speak. Maribel looked at Beatrice as if remembering, with rage, that the object of her scheme had a voice. Beatrice stepped toward the writing table. "I will not pretend this has not harmed me. I will not pretend compassion is easy. But I will not answer theft with cruelty for pleasure. I require restoration." Lady Penrith inclined her head. "Name it." Beatrice's heartbeat struck hard, but her voice held. A written retraction of the gossip notice. A formal apology from Lady Maribel, acknowledging that my private correspondence was read, altered, and misrepresented. A public withdrawal of the claim that I pursued His Grace improperly. Lord Harcourt will cease every implication of an understanding with me, and he will not approach me again, socially or privately. Edwin opened his mouth. Adrian looked at him. Edwin closed it. Lady Penrith turned toward Maribel. "Until restitution is made, you will not be received at my morning calls," Lady Sefton added. "Nor mine, Mrs." Anstruther swallowed, then said, "Nor at my dinners." Maribel's face went white. Social exile had no bars, but every person in that room understood its lock. Adrian faced his sister. "You will withdraw from hosting at Montclair House for the remainder of the season. Lady Octavia's name will not be used in any arrangement of yours again. The apology will be written before nightfall." Maribel stared at him. "You would remove me from my own brother's house? From authority in it?" Yes. The mercy in the distinction did not weaken the sentence. It made it final. Edwin tried to recover dignity with a bow. "This has gone far beyond proportion." Adrian's expression turned cold. "You used my name, cornered a lady with pressure, carried a false phrase to print, and hoped to profit from her isolation. My patronage is withdrawn. You will find doors less quick to open." Edwin's color drained. No further punishment was needed in a world where closed doors spoke fluently. The room settled into a silence unlike the earlier ones. This was not hunger, it was aftermath. Adrian turned to Beatrice before everyone who had doubted her and bowed. Not shallowly, not as performance, as a man acknowledging a debt. "Lady Beatrice, my silence after the gossip sheet harmed you. I told myself caution would protect your name. Instead, it allowed others to use my absence as proof against you. I am sorry." The apology moved through the room, but Beatrice received it privately, where excuses had once been expected. "Thank you, Your Grace." He lifted his head. "I ask one more thing, only if the asking does not burden you." The world seemed to narrow, though every eye remained upon them. "Ask it. May I call upon you properly? Not as a man repairing wrong, but as a gentleman who wishes to know you without scandals between us." Once, such attention would have frightened her into gratitude or flight. Now she felt something steadier. Choice. She let the room wait. She let Adrian wait too. Then she gave him the smallest smile. "You may call tomorrow, Your Grace," she said. "I will decide after tea." Astonishment held the room for one breath. Then Aunt Rosamond made a soft sound of satisfaction, and Lady Penrith's eyes gleamed. The broken seal still lay on the writing table, but its meaning had changed. It no longer only proved violation. It proved that Beatrice had been heard, and that the room which once consumed her humiliation had been made to answer it. The first apology arrived at Pike House 3 days after Lady Penrith's drawing-room had turned from entertainment into judgment, and Beatrice knew before opening it that remorse had not written the address. Lady Maribel Montclair's hand was too elegant, too steady, too proud of itself even in defeat. The paper bore the Montclair crest, the same crest that had once been pressed over Beatrice's stolen words. But this time the seal was unbroken when it reached her. That mattered more than she wished it to matter. Aunt Rosamond sat opposite her by the fire, spectacles balanced low on her nose, pretending not to watch every movement. Beatrice read the letter once, then she read it again, because justice, when it arrived in stiff phrases, still deserved to be understood. Lady Maribel acknowledged that Lady Beatrice Vale's private correspondence had been read without permission. She acknowledged that the final lines presented at Montclair House had not been written by Lady Beatrice. She acknowledged that any suggestion of improper pursuit toward the Duke of Calderwick had been false. The apology did not kneel. It stood rigidly in a corner and resented the room. Yet it existed. "Well," Aunt Rosamond said, when Beatrice handed it across, "she has confessed as far as vanity permits. We must not expect a sinner to become a saint before luncheon." Beatrice let out a breath that almost became laughter. "Is it enough? For society, perhaps. For your heart, less quickly. Hearts are poor clerks. They file pain long after the account is settled." The corrected notice appeared the next morning, plain enough for respectability, and sharp enough for those who knew how to read between polite lines. A misunderstanding concerning a private letter had been resolved. Lady Beatrice Vale had been exonerated of improper conduct. Certain insinuations circulated by Lord Edwin Harcourt were withdrawn and regretted. No one mentioned forgery. No one printed Lady Maribel's shame in full. Yet London understood. That was the true currency of Mayfair. By evening, callers who had once developed headaches sent cards again. Women who had whispered pleading correspondent now remembered that they had always doubted the tale. Lady Penrith received the apology, then allowed her disapproval to travel with more efficiency than gossip ever had. Lady Maribel withdrew from the remainder of the season and was sent to a widowed aunt in Bath, where the waters were expected to soothe her nerves, and the distance was expected to soothe everyone else's. Lord Edwin Harcourt's punishment wore a gentleman's coat and made no public fuss. Invitations cooled, cards went unanswered. At White's, men who had laughed at his remarks discovered sudden business when he approached. Adrian's patronage had not been shouted from him. It had simply vanished, and with it went the doors Edwin had believed would always open. Lady Fenwick called on the 5th day, dressed in a shade of grey that suggested wounded motherhood more carefully than grief. She found Beatrice at Pike House, with Aunt Rosamond present and tea already poured, which deprived the visit of ambush. "You must return home now," Lady Fenwick said after formal greetings had been exhausted. "People will think there is division in the family." Beatrice looked at her mother across the small parlour. Once that sentence would have sent her searching for obedience like a dropped pin. Now it only made her sad. "There is division in the family, Mama." Lady Fenwick's mouth tightened. I acted as I thought necessary. So did I. You speak differently. No, Beatrice said gently. I speak aloud. Lady Fenwick looked away first. It was not victory. It was too melancholy for that. You would choose your aunt's house over your father's? I will visit Vale House when I may do so without being asked to apologize for telling the truth. I will not return to a silence arranged for everyone's comfort but mine. Her mother's eyes glistened, though pride would not let tears fall. You have become hard. No. I have become harder to use. Aunt Rosamond lifted her cup to hide an expression that might have ruined diplomacy. Lady Fenwick left unsatisfied, but quieter than she had arrived. Beatrice stood by the window after the carriage rolled away, feeling grief and freedom share the same breath. Some restorations did not mend the old house. They taught one where not to live. Adrian called the following afternoon at the hour. Beatrice had permitted, and Aunt Rosamond received him with the air of a jailer considering whether a prisoner had improved. He brought no extravagant bouquet, no public display large enough to feed another rumor. He brought a small book instead, a volume of essays Beatrice had once mentioned when speaking of language and misuse. I was told I might call, he said after bowing. You were told you might call, Beatrice replied. You were not promised a favorable verdict. His eyes warmed. Then I shall try not to appear acquitted too early. Aunt Rosamond poured tea. A humble duke, I shall write the date in my prayer book. Courtship, when it began, was slower than London expected and more careful than Beatrice had imagined. Adrian called properly. He drove with her in Hyde Park under Aunt Rosamond's chaperonage. He asked her opinion before offering his own. He did not hurry forgiveness by dressing apology as romance. One afternoon near the Serpentine, while the carriage moved at a measured pace, and Aunt Rosamond appeared to be studying ducks with judicial severity. Adrian said quietly, I keep thinking of the day after the gossip. Sheet, Beatrice looked toward the water. So do I. I told myself caution would protect you. It didn't. No, I won't confuse restraint with courage again. He did not ask whether she forgave him. That restraint mattered. It allowed forgiveness to move at its own pace, and, because it was not hunted, to come nearer. 3 weeks after the corrected notice, Adrian asked whether Beatrice would visit Caldemere Hall in Hampshire, with Aunt Rosamond and Lady Penrith as chaperoned respectability. Lady Penrith agreed, declaring that two formidable women could sanctify almost any journey short of elopement. The road carried them out of London's noise and into fields edged with hedgerows, past villages with church towers and lanes bright beneath a mild sky. Caldemere Hall rose at the end of a long drive, grey stone warmed by afternoon light, its windows steady and unshowing. It was not as glittering as Montclair House. It had no appetite for display. It endured. Adrian helped Lady Penrith from the carriage, then Aunt Rosamond, then paused before offering Beatrice his hand. He always gave her that half-second now. The choice had become part of their language. She placed her gloved hand in his. Welcome to Caldemere, he said. It is beautiful. It is old, inconvenient in winter, and troubled by one corridor that appears to lead nowhere. Then it is honest. He smiled. I hoped you might think so. He showed her the gallery, the terrace, the morning room, and finally a smaller chamber overlooking the lawns where afternoon light fell across a polished writing table. Shelves lined one wall. Fresh paper waited in a drawer. A stand held wax in several colors, including blue and Montclair red. Beside it lay a velvet box. Beatrice stopped at the threshold. What is this room? Adrian stood several feet away, giving the answer space. Yours if you wish it. Not as a place assigned to you. As a place no one enters without your leave. Her breath caught because the room was not grand. It was exact, a place for words. A place where privacy was not a trap, not a weapon, not a kindness granted by someone else. Adrian. It was the first time she had used his name there without title. The sound changed the air. He opened the velvet box. Inside lay a small silver seal. 2 initials curved within the design, B and A, neither swallowing the other. I had this made, not to replace your seal. Not to cover it with mine. Only if you choose to use it. Beatrice touched the edge of the box. You understand now. I am trying. That may matter more. He looked at her then, not as a duke granting safety, but as a man awaiting judgment from the woman he loved. Beatrice, I love you. I don't love you because you were wronged, and I don't ask you to marry me because my name can protect yours. I love your judgment. I love your courage when it is quiet and when it is not. I would rather be corrected by you than praised by anyone else. Will you allow me to make a life beside you? Tears rose, but they did not shame her. They belonged to her. Yes, she said. Then joy, shy and real, touched her mouth. But I reserve the right to correct you often. His relief made him look younger than his rank. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Their engagement was announced properly the following week. Lady Penrith approved in the tone of one accepting a treaty she had helped negotiate. Aunt Rosamond declared the Duke tolerable and ordered new gloves. Lady Fenwick sent a careful blessing that did not quite apologize and did not quite command. Beatrice accepted it as a beginning, not a debt. On her last afternoon at Caldermere before returning to London, she sat in the writing room and wrote to Aunt Rosamond about the house, the useless corridor, the wind over the park, and the strange peace of being given room without being made smaller. When she finished, Adrian stood by the window, not looking over her shoulder, waiting. Beatrice chose the new seal. The wax warmed, softened, and fell in a clean circle beneath her hand. She pressed the silver down and held it steady until the impression set. The old broken letter was locked away in Adrian's study, preserved not as pain, but as proof. This new one lay before her, closed by choice, marked by her own hand, and meant only for the person she trusted to receive it whole. Outside, the Hampshire fields stretched bright and still. Beatrice lifted the sealed letter and smiled at the unbroken wax. This time, her words would arrive as she had written them.